Let's talk about the things you know. Things you know already. How to solve a quadratic. Speak. Tell me. What are methods you know to solve a quadratic? Just throw them out. Yeah, I heard factoring, square root, graphing, and quadratic formula. All right, these are four. There are other ways, but these are the four major ones that you know. Now let's try to put some order to them, okay? So the first one we learned, what was the first one? The first one we learned was just basically graphing, right? So what needs to be true for graphing? Well, you guys know how to graph. You know how to graph anything in this form. Correct? You should know how to graph anything in this form. But with graphing, you're only doing what? What are you doing when you graph and you're trying to solve? Solving by graphing. When you're trying to solve by graphing, you're looking for what? What are you looking for? The x-intercepts. That's correct. The x-intercepts. And if you're looking for the x-intercepts, these might, yeah, it's a little iffy. That's right. Do you want me to say your name so that everyone knows you're really smart? Okay. So, girl A, you are really smart. It's a little iffy, isn't it? It's a little iffy because you could just be off a little bit on your graph. Your eyes could be messed up that day, whatever. So it's not exact, but it gives a good picture. But it is a good picture. It is a good picture. Yeah, that's why I called you girl A. You just said it. Done. Okay. Say it loud then. Next. So that's one method. But notice the form could be ax squared plus bx plus c. You know how to graph all those. What else? What was the next thing we learned? Solved by what? Solved by what? Let's go back to our... What was the next thing we learned? Square root was the next thing we learned. Now, square root, to solve by square root, what form did it need to be in? Yeah, it needs to be y equals, it needs to be 0 equals ax squared plus c. Why does it have to be equal to 0? You are trying to find the zeros. You're trying to find the roots. This is why it's called the roots, because you end up taking the square root. You're trying to find the roots. And the steps on this would be to do what? Subtract c, and then divide by a. Then what? What's the last step? And then take the square root. Those are the steps for that. But this is bad because there's no b term. It has to be this. If there's no b term, you can do this, and it's really easy. Could I graph this? Do you guys think you could graph this? Yeah, you could graph it if it's in this form, but it's probably easier just to do the algebra. All right, the next method we learned was yesterday, and yeah, yesterday and the day before. That is by factoring. So solve by factoring. Solving by factoring, could it look like this? Ax squared plus bx plus c? Yeah. But it has to be equal to 0. You have to make it look like this, and it has to eventually be equal to 0, okay? So that's the case, and then what's the problem with solving by factoring? It's got to be able to factor. Yeah, and you have to factor, right? That's right. If it's not factorable, you can't solve by factoring, okay? If you can't get there by car, you can't drive. Does that make sense? So you have to take a different method of transport, like walking or riding bike. Well, probably what I was speaking to was more like there's a big old ocean in the way, you know. So anyway, my point is, if I can't factor this, so it has to be factorable. If I can't factor it, then I can't solve by factoring. It has to be factorable. You can tell me the steps, though, to solve by factoring, because it's not just factoring. What are the steps? Somebody besides Smart Girl A. Oh, you didn't, oh yeah, that's right. No, I don't want to. I like Smart Girl A. What? What are the steps? Okay, well, we factor all the steps to factor. So step 1 is to factor. Once you factor it, set each factor equal to 0. All right, and then you solve each part. Solve each equation. Does that make sense? For x. All right, so that's what we did yesterday for homework. And in addition to that, we also did solve by quadratic formula. Quadratic formula. What is the quadratic formula? So, and then this one's good because it works every time. But you have to get it in what form? It has to be in this form, doesn't it? Ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. You have to have it like this. Okay. 60% of the time. It works every time. No, it works every time. All right. That is it. Game over.